Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world, one book at a time.
All right, so for this explainer, we're going to dive into a pretty recent book. It's the 2023 release from U.S. Senator Bernie Sanders, and it's called It's Okay to Be Angry About Capitalism.
So right from the get-go, the book throws this central contradiction at you. It's a real puzzle about what it feels like to live in America today. And here's the puzzle. How is it that in the wealthiest country in the history of the world, so many people feel insecure, angry, and just left behind, you know? That's the big fundamental question the book really tries to tackle.
Okay, so with that question in mind, let's get into the book's main argument. It kind of presents it like a diagnosis of our current economic system.
The book actually gives this system a name, Capitalism. And the core idea here is pretty shocking. It's not that the system is broken. No, the book argues it's working exactly as it was designed to, driven by what it calls uncontrollable greed to funnel wealth and power straight to the top, instead of, helping everyone prosper.
So you might be asking, how does this system actually work? Well, the book points to a few key things that make it all tick.
It really boils down to three main things. First, you've got the rise of what the book calls an oligarchic class, basically a super small group of people with a ton of wealth and power. Then, there's the way corporations have, according to the book, captured politics and the media, which lets them shape the rules and the conversation. And finally, there's the weakening of labor unions, which has really cut down the bargaining power for the average person.
Okay, that's a lot of abstract stuff. So to make it easier to grasp, the book uses a really powerful visual metaphor to help us see exactly what's happening.
And that metaphor is a giant funnel. Picture this. The wide mouth at the top, that's all the value, all the productivity our economy creates. It's huge. But then, these systemic pressures kick in. Things like corporate lobbying, weaker unions, tax laws that favor the wealthy, they all squeeze the sides of that funnel, making it narrower and narrower. And the result? All that wealth doesn't spread out. It gets channeled down to a tiny little spout at the bottom, pouring directly into the hands of that small oligarchic class.
And to give you an idea of just how narrow that spout is, the book shares some pretty staggering numbers. Get this. It says that just 3 billionaires own more wealth than the bottom 165 million Americans combined. I mean, just let that sink in for a second. That's the endpoint of the funnel we're talking about.
And it's not just about billionaires either. The book also zooms in on the gap inside companies themselves. It states that the average CEO of a big corporation makes around 400 times more than their average employee. 400 times.
So, okay, these numbers are wild. But what does it actually mean for people? The book argues this isn't just some abstract economic debate. It has deep, profound consequences for human beings, and it frames this whole issue in terms of our rights.
It draws this really important line between two kinds of rights. On one hand, you have political rights, free speech, the right to a trial, things that are guaranteed in the Constitution. But on the other hand, you have what the book calls economic rights, access to healthcare, a decent job, a place to live, and those aren't guaranteed at all. And that, the book says, creates a huge imbalance in our society.
And to really hammer this point home, it brings up a quote from President Franklin D. Roosevelt back in 1944. He said, "True individual freedom cannot exist without economic security and independence." The idea is simple, right? If you're constantly worried about your health or your housing, how free are you really?
And we're not just talking about ideals here. The book argues this has literal life or death stakes. It cites this government study that's just incredible. They tracked a group of Americans all aged between 51 and 61, starting back in 1992. When they checked back in 2014, more than 75% of the people in the richest 20% were still alive. Makes sense. But for the people in the poorest 20%, less than half had survived. That's a massive survival gap, and the book frames it as a direct result of this economic inequality.
Okay, so let's circle all the way back to where we started. Back to the title of the book itself, back to the anger.
Because here's the book's final crucial point. That anger that so many people feel, it argues that it's not a personal problem. It's not a political failing. It's actually a completely rational, understandable response to living under the immense pressure of a system that just feels fundamentally unfair.
And the book leaves us with a pretty powerful thought to chew on. Quoting the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., he said, "One day we must ask the question, why are there 40 million poor people in America? And when you begin to ask that question, you're raising questions about the economic system." It's really a prompt for all of us, right? To stop looking at just the symptoms and start questioning the whole system.
For the full, long-form deep dive into this book and its ideas, follow the link in the description.
If you enjoy this kind of systems-level analysis, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next.